Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are exploring one of the most fascinating and honestly deeply debated frameworks within our entire legal system. We're talking about the due process model of criminal justice. Now, you might be wondering, why does the legal system sometimes seem to make it just incredibly difficult to put suspected criminals behind bars? Why are there so many complex rules, loopholes, and technicalities? Well, it's not an accident. It is entirely by design. In this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly why the system is built this way, and we'll use actual legal frameworks and real-world case studies to see how this model operates both in theory and in practice.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to map out abstract legal rules and apply them to high-stakes true crime cases by looking at protecting the accused, the obstacle course rules, sociological links, due process in action, and finally, miscarriages of justice. Let's get going.
Section 1. Protecting the accused. Let's set up the core philosophy of this whole framework.
So to really grasp the due process model, you have to understand its biggest fear. This model operates on the core belief that the power of the state, and by that we mean the police, the prosecutors, the government, is the single greatest threat to an individual's freedom. Think about it. The state has immense resources. It has the power to detain you, to question you, and ultimately to take away your liberty. Because of that massive inherent imbalance of power, the due process model insists on a strict presumption of innocence. Basically, you are innocent until proven guilty after a fair, rigorous trial. It prioritizes the rights of the accused individual over the immediate demands of society to just quickly secure a conviction.
To really visualize this, it helps to compare it to its absolute opposite. The competing theory is the crime control model, which looks at justice like a conveyor belt, a highly efficient, fast-moving assembly line that prosecutes, convicts, and punishes the probably guilty as quickly as possible. But the due process model, it rejects that completely. Instead, it views justice as an obstacle course. And this is absolutely crucial. It's our central metaphor today. The model essentially sets up a series of really complex hurdles that prosecutors and police must successfully navigate and overcome before they can ever secure conviction.
Section 2. The obstacle course rules. Let's look at exactly what these hurdles are.
You see, the due process model doesn't have blind faith in the police's ability to conduct flawless investigations. It just assumes that incompetence, dishonesty, or frankly, simple human error are gonna happen. Therefore, it safeguards a suspect's rights through strict procedural steps. Every single phase of an investigation is a hurdle, from a lawful arrest, where the suspect is told exactly why they're being detained, to the absolute right to legal representation during questioning. It's like a giant game of dominoes. If the state trips over just one of these hurdles by breaking its own rules, the whole case can come crashing down.
A massive part of this obstacle course involves the rules governing the admissibility of evidence. Basically, not everything the police find can be used in court. If evidence is obtained illegally, it's completely blocked from entering the obstacle course in the first place. For example, a forced confession extracted through sleep deprivation, strictly inadmissible. Hearsay, which is essentially secondhand rumor, heavily restricted. And entrapment, where the police trick or push someone into committing a crime they otherwise wouldn't have, absolutely forbidden. The system would literally rather throw out evidence than reward the state for breaking the rules.
So the crucial point here is that fairness is paramount. And honestly, nothing highlights this better than the duty of disclosure. Under the due process model, there are no secret trials. There are no dramatic, movie-style courtroom surprises where the prosecution suddenly pulls a smoking gun out of a briefcase. No way. The state has a strict duty to disclose the evidence they have against the defendant well in advance of the trial. This ensures the defense has the time and ability to examine the evidence, find their own experts, and prepare a fair defense. It essentially levels the playing field against the vast resources of the state.
Section 3. Sociological links and theories. So we know the legal mechanics, but why do sociologists argue these rules are so essential?
What's really fascinating is how perfectly this legal model maps onto sociological theory. Take left realism on one side. Left realists argue that oppressive, militaristic policing in poor areas actually triggers confrontations and makes residents totally unwilling to help the police, right? So the police must follow due process and act in a lawful, non-discriminatory way, because effective crime fighting actually depends on the cooperation of the community. Then on the other side, we have labeling theory. This theory warns that police might be tempted to act illegally just to harass groups they've labeled as typical criminals. The strict rules of the due process model offer a shield against this. It requires police to follow lawful procedures, preventing them from overstepping just because they have a hunch about a certain social group.
Section 4. Due process in action. Theories are great, But let's see how this obstacle course actually holds up in reality.
Let's look at the highly publicized case of Colin Stagg. Following the tragic murder of Rachel Nichol back in 1992, the police faced immense public pressure to find the killer. Now, despite lacking any physical evidence against him, the police became completely convinced that a local man named Colin Stagg was the culprit. Because they couldn't clear those standard hurdles of the obstacle course to get a legitimate conviction, they tried to bypass them. They used an undercover female officer in an elaborate honey trap operation. They were essentially attempting to trick Stagg into admitting to the crime by feigning romantic interest and sharing violent fantasies.
And this brilliantly illustrates the due process model working exactly as it was intended to. When the case finally went to court, the judge threw it out. The evidence from the honey trap was ruled completely inadmissible because it was a clear-cut case of police entrapment. The state had tried to cheat the obstacle course, and the rules of due process acted like a brick wall, protecting a citizen from state oppression. It was actually proven later through DNA evidence that an entirely different man had committed the crime. By throwing out the bad evidence, the due process model literally saved an innocent man from being wrongly imprisoned.
Section 5. Miscarriages of justice. The system, however, isn't perfect. What happens when the rules of the obstacle course are completely bypassed by the very people entrusted to uphold them?
We have to look impartially at cases where the system breaks down, because it leads to devastating miscarriages of justice. One of the most tragic examples of this is the case of Sally Clark. In 1999, she was wrongly convicted and jailed for the murder of her 2 baby sons, who had both tragically died of sudden infant death syndrome. She spent over 3 years in prison for crimes she simply did not commit.
So why did the system fail her so terribly? It was a direct failure to follow the rules of disclosure. The prosecution failed to disclose relevant information to her defense lawyers. Specifically, the Home Office pathologist, who was a key prosecution witness, actually possessed microbiological test results proving one of the babies had a deadly bacterial infection, a natural cause of death. But he failed to disclose this crucial information to Sally Clark's defense. By hiding this evidence, the state bypassed the obstacle course, prevented a fair trial, and directly caused an innocent mother to be wrongly convicted.
The ultimate dilemma. And that brings us to the overarching theme of the material we've been unpacking today. The due process model isn't naive. It fully acknowledges and accepts a really difficult reality. Because the obstacle course is so tough, and because the rules on evidence and procedure are so incredibly strict, sometimes people who have actually committed crimes will go free on a procedural technicality. But the model is built on a very clear moral hierarchy. It argues that letting a guilty person walk free because the state broke the rules is a necessary lesser evil compared to the absolute tragedy of using state power to convict and imprison a completely innocent person. Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question. The due process model prioritizes civil liberties and protections against state power above all else, even if it means sacrificing some efficiency in crime control. But looking at that delicate balance between the rights of the accused and the safety of society, is letting the guilty go free on a technicality truly a lesser evil than convicting the innocent? It's a fundamental dilemma at the very heart of our legal system, and definitely one worth thinking deeply about. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning how our world is structured.